You're listening to a podcast from the BBC World Service. This is Hardtalk with me, Stephen Sacker. Thanks for downloading this edition of the programme. I do hope you enjoy it. Welcome to Hardtalk on the BBC World Service with me, Stephen Sacker. It is not easy being a member of the political elite in Cyprus these days. The island's people feel betrayed by a generation of politicians who pursued an economic strategy which has ended in disaster. And Cyprus's EU partners seem to be contemptuous of what they see as Cypriot irresponsibility and incompetence. All of which makes life tough for Ioannis Kasoulides, a veteran politician of the centre-right who is serving a second term as the country's foreign minister. He was a key player in the negotiations which led to Cyprus's EU entry and accession into the Eurozone. Back then, of course, he couldn't foresee how Cyprus's newfound prosperity, based on its status as a banking centre and financial haven, would be destroyed by risk-taking and hubris exposed by the debt crisis inside the Eurozone. Now Cyprus's leaders have to pick up the pieces and rebuild. But rebuild what and how? Well, Ioannis Kasoulides joins me now. Welcome to Hardtalk.
Good evening.
No one, I think, would dispute that Cyprus is in a terrible mess. Do you acknowledge that you in Cyprus have no one to blame but yourselves?
We have greatly to blame ourselves. It is true that Cyprus has not taken the right decisions at the right time, as early as possible, so far as the fiscal consolidation is concerned. Neither had Cyprus taken the right decisions regarding the expansion of the banking sector, becoming bigger and bigger. And when the problem with the PSI came up, the first trouble, by being much bigger than the GDP of the country was unable to help the banks.
So that was a fundamental strategic error.
This has to be acknowledged. It's a strategic error, and it's an error of not taking the right decisions because they were unpopular decisions.
And when Wolfgang Schäuble, for example, the German finance minister, talks about your economic model being broken, being bankrupt, as a model, as an entire strategy, you would accept that?
Yeah, I think we should accept this and accept that we must be looking now for an economic model on foundations that are healthy and are solid and are diversified. But I don't know if I may add to what you have been asking me, that having accepted our responsibilities, I must express the bitterness and the disappointment of the Cypriots of the fact that the choice of the remedy was so abrupt and so brutal that everything had to be corrected during a night.
Well, it had to be abrupt because your two biggest banks were going bust and threatened to take your entire economy with them.
Yeah, but if the initial decision were to be given, let's say, 3 years adjustment period in order to curtail and bring down the size of the banks to the right way and reform drastically the banking model, I think that we would have avoided the serious problems that, as you have said in your introduction, the Cypriots are going to face, with enterprises closing down, with people losing their jobs, and all the consequences for this.
Yes, it's just, I advisedly began with this idea of acceptance of responsibilities because I have heard you, your president, other senior figures in the government saying things like, it's not fair, Europe is treating us like a guinea pig in a grand experiment, Europe is pretending to help, but the price they are asking is too high. All of these statements which appear to be directed more at pointing a finger at Europe than getting on with fixing your own problems.
No, there are two things. We have to get on and fix our own problems, but this should not stop us from expressing within the European Union, as true Europeans, our criticism of what has happened. I think, who can deny that what has happened regarding the bail-in, something that is used for the first time
Yeah, and
in
for
Europe,
people who aren't clear about this, the bail-in means that for the first time those who held deposits in banks, for example, far from being saved from the direct implications of the rescue package, are actually part of the package because they are taking, to use this dreadful word, a haircut of their own.
Yeah, and let me say that this is the answer to the bigger question about the banks in Europe that are too big to fail. Whether the taxpayers' money will be always available to banks whose management is reckless and takes risks. But an experiment was needed, and this is the guinea pig we are talking about. That the experiment was used in Cyprus. It was relatively safe because not so much systemic. It was used, and now it is served as the example for the rest. So the fact
let
that
me stop you there. I spoke
yes.
to Christine Lagarde, the managing director of the IMF, just the other day. First point she made was that Cyprus is not, absolutely not, in her view, a template for what will happen in other European Union weaker economies, so she doesn't see it as a model. But she also said one thing that was very interesting to me. She said that in terms of regrets, the regret she had about the whole bailout, bail-in process was that the Cypriot government and the feelings of the Cypriot people were not on the same page. She regretted that she had not understood that. When your government, your president, demanded that the bail-in involve even the small bank depositors, those with less than 100,000 euros in the banks, the IMF and the ECB eventually signed on to it. That, they now believe, was a fundamental mistake, a mistake that began with your president.
No, I don't think that this is true. That's what they say afterwards. But the truth is that there was a proposal which involved bank depositors of below 100,000 of a small amount, I think 3.5, which would have appeared as a levy, temporary levy, to be transformed into shares.
Yeah, this was your government's idea.
No, the shares was our government idea, but the proposal for a 3.5% below 100,000, it was theirs because it was yielding, according to the proponents of the idea, 2.5 billion out of the 5.8 that they were needed.
Well, with respect, everybody who I have talked to about this, from the side of the IMF, from the EU Commission, from the ECB, says that your president wanted the small depositors to take a haircut because that was the only way he felt he could sell the proposal to the big depositors, many of them Russians, who were going to take a much bigger haircut.
Well, but you have talked to everybody else, now you are talking to me, and you are getting my version of things.
Somebody around here is not telling the truth.
I don't know who this one is.
Who do you think it is?
Well, I'm saying what I know. I know that a proposal came, that they said they looked at the figures, and they saw that many accounts were divided so that they will become below 100,000, and there was the argument that the below 100,000 was yielding 2.2 billion, which was a substantial amount.
I want to talk a lot about the future, not just the past. So very quickly, would you now accept that that idea, that initial idea to make small depositors pay was a terrible mistake, yes or no?
Yeah, it was a mistake because, first of all, if you do this, you have to compensate those of below 100,000, and the state was not in a position to do so.
Okay. Next simple question. Would you accept that the Cypriot government still isn't being entirely straight with its own people? For example, I remember spokesmen and women for your government in the immediate aftermath of the bailout deal assuring the Cypriot public that capital controls would be temporary and would be lifted within weeks. Well, here we are, many weeks after that initial deal was done. Capital controls are still in place and there is no indication about when they'll be lifted.
First of all, you know very well this discussion who decides about capital controls and the restrictions. And it is not the government of Cyprus. The decisions about the restrictions are taken by the governor of the central bank, who is in constant kind of communication with the European Central Bank. I still maintain that the restrictions which are gradually lifted are going to be lifted altogether, not in the distant future. What it remains to be arranged before lifting them all together is to decide about the exact amount of the haircut for the Bank of Cyprus, which has not yet been decided.
It's going to be very substantial, isn't it? We know that the big depositors in Laiki Bank, basically they've lost their money. They're finished.
That's very unfortunate.
And it may be that they'll be finished in the Bank of Cyprus too.
No. The great effort of this government, and that's the essence of the agreement of the 21st of March is to save the Bank of Cyprus, and the undertaking...
If you possibly can.
No, the undertaking of the European Central Bank is to do whatever it's available in order to save this Bank of Cyprus, which is the backbone of the economy of Cyprus. I think that the way we are proceeding, the prudent way, we are going to save this bank.
Let's talk about some of the other ramifications of this catastrophe for Cyprus, and again, whether the government is being entirely straight with the people of the country. The initial burden on Cyprus was put at around 7 billion, which was going to come from the bailing in of the bank deposits. That rose within weeks, according to both the IMF and the EU, to another 6 billion on top that the Cypriots themselves were going to have to find. Did you know that that extra 6 billion was going to be imposed upon your people?
No, but these 6 billions you are referring to, if I understand correctly, are what Cyprus is going to be its contribution in the effort.
On top of the initial 7 billion, it's now going to be 13 billion.
No, this is not the case. There is a memorandum with the Troika that was decided about cuts in public expenditure, about increasing taxation, about all the measures that have been agreed, about privatization. And all this will be the 6 billion you are referring to.
Well, that sounds very simple, but it's not simple at all, isn't it? I just have checked my latest Cypriot news wires. Parliament in the last day or two has postponed a vote on a bill for additional scaled pay cuts in the public sector. They've also delayed an item looking at further restrictions on public health care entitlements. So some of the very profound and very difficult cuts and savings that your government is going to have to make are being postponed.
Postponed for how long? A parliament should have the right to examine thoroughly what the government is proposing, and we respect this. And I think that the postponement will be for a week or two, but everything will be in place as it was in December, when the parliament, in an exemplary way, accepted all the contents that were agreed in the Memorandum of Understanding, and this is going to be the case hopefully this time. I think that you should wait for this criticism if you don't see it happening.
Well, I'm just not sure that
if you
the
see a
Cypriot
postponement of a week or two, I don't think that this is something that it will not happen in the end.
Yes, well, I sense your confidence, but I'm sure you are aware of the depth of desperation, of anger, of fury that many ordinary Cypriot people feel today.
Quite rightly so. Quite rightly so. I don't think that you have said that this government came to power on the 1st of March. This government, while in opposition, was the one that was criticizing all along the handling of the economy, the handling of the case of the banking sector, and had to deal with this abrupt bail-in within 15 days of taking power. I don't think you have said this.
Well, it wasn't an easy inheritance, I grant you that, but...
Thank you.
But is it really going to help to try to pile the blame on the last government? I mean, I've been looking at opinion polls which seem to suggest that 91% of Cypriots believe the entire political elite is corrupt, is incapable of dealing honestly with Cyprus's current problems.
Well, I will not blame the feeling of the public opinion in Cyprus after what is happening, what was happening before, and to where it has come to a point that we know with the destruction of the economic model. How can I blame them? The question is up to political system, and in particular the political parties, instead of blaming each other, to get themselves together and regain the confidence of the people, otherwise go home and have new people at the helm.
It doesn't augur well, does it, that the president, your boss, set up an investigation panel to try to figure out what went wrong. He appointed 3 senior judges, and 2 of them have already quit.
Yeah, you know why. At least the last one who has quitted, he has discovered that the law firm of his sons were involved with some lawsuits against the Bank of Cyprus, and therefore he considered that he should exempt himself. So it's exactly for reasons of self-righteousness that they have quitted. and not for any other reason, and they have been replaced with others.
Let's just think about how Cyprus does get back to some sort of sustainable growth. We spoke in preparation for this to one of the world's most important and influential investors, Mohammed Al-Arian, who runs the PIMCO investment fund.
I know who he is.
Yes. Yeah. He says the rescue of Cyprus does little to enhance the outlook for the country. Without growth, sustainability is a major issue. And he asked one simple question: where is the job engine for a country that is now devoid of any meaningful growth model?
Yeah.
What's your answer to that?
Well, it's a very difficult answer, but we have introduced a week ago a number of measures that will stimulate the economy, not measures coming from the government, but measures for stimulating the private sector. That's where we rely our hope, because the private sector, it is not the first time that has managed to succeed. We have in 1974 destruction of the economy of Cyprus during the Turkish invasion, and the resilience was demonstrated, and it's thanks to the private sector that growth took over again. So with measures that will allow and incentives that will allow the private sector to get its activity going, for instance, now an effort is made with by the banks to cut interest rates. One of the major problems in the economy of Cyprus was the fact that the high interest rate on deposits made people park their money into banks instead of investing them or spending them in the economy. And now the interest rates are going to come down, and hopefully that's one of the major stimulators of an economy. You don't need to pour money from a government in order to stimulate an economy.
Well, I'll come back to that in a minute before we end, but just briefly, I'm very aware that I've got the Cypriot foreign minister in front of me, and one way in which many outside observers of Cyprus say that Cyprus could easily and reasonably quickly change the economic outlook for your country, for your island, is to get serious at last about the normalization and then reunification process with the north of your island by talking direct to Turkey. The Turks have offered you immediate summit talks. Why don't you just say yes?
First of all, they have not offered immediate summit talks. They want the usual kind of talks between the two communities, whereas it's we who say that we should stop pretending, and the main problem is between Turkey and Cyprus, and the way that the problem is going to be resolved is talking directly to Turkey. Secondly, do you think that it is right for Turkey at this moment to be perceived that is feeling our weakness and is trying to take advantage of this weakness for her own benefit?
But if I may say so, that is the language of enmity. It's the old thinking. What we've seen is your country in 2004 rejecting a UN peace plan brokered by Kofi Annan when the Turkish side accepted it. Mm-hmm. Over the most recent negotiating period, you have seemed disinterested in achieving a peace. Surely now, given the fundamental problems your country faces, it is time to change the language, change the thinking, and really engage.
The last thing that the Cypriots would like to hear at the moment is that all this economic debacle that has taken place was prepared in order to bring them or force them into accepting a settlement that they don't like. You mentioned the referendum of that time.
Well, they might like it a
when
bit
you
more
put
now.
ballot boxes, the ballot boxes bring results that one has to respect, whether it's a yes or whether no. I said yes at that referendum.
For example, let's just talk for a second about
Yeah,
gas.
but
Let's talk about gas.
It is
There is
wrong
no
to
way.
accuse people. It is wrong to accuse people when they have taken a decision in a democratic way because they had the choice. They had the choice to say yes. They had the choice to say no. I have said yes.
And today,
I was a minority, and now I am obliged to respect the decision of the people like any other democratic person.
But Minister, circumstances have changed. And if we just look at one other way in which Cypriots hope they might escape from the terrible crisis they face, they look at the potential of the gas reserves off your shores. There is no way those gas reserves can be exploited peacefully and successfully without a long-term peaceful, stable relationship with Turkey.
I am surprised that this axiom is so easily acceptable, that Turkey can dictate to another independent sovereign country who is acting legitimately according to the United Nations Convention for the Law of the Sea, that Turkey has the right to dictate what is going to happen about the wealth that exists in the economic zone of Cyprus.
Does it make any difference to you that the EU, the Commission, leading European politicians all want to see your government engage in a new way on the Cyprus problem, if I can put it that way?
Who said that we are not going to engage?
Well, nothing I'm hearing from you suggests that there's any new thinking.
You haven't seen nothing yet. But let me tell you something. Is it so unreasonable that we say, let us wait until October, because now we cannot focus on the efforts for the solution of the Cyprus problem, as our primary duty to our citizens is to put the economy into a way of recovery again?
A final thought,
is it
then.
too much what we are asking?
Well,
why is Turkey insisting that we should begin immediately? What is the reason behind this insistence, which shows no sensitivity? And this is not an enmity language, as you say, because you haven't seen yet our government dealing with this matter.
I am interested in the degree to which you put great faith and great store by the democratic voice of your own people. All of the polls suggest that right now many of your own compatriots are fed up with the euro. In some polls, a majority want to get out of the euro. Your own Archbishop in Nicosia says it's time to leave. Paul Krugman, a leading Keynesian economist in the US, says leaving the euro would greatly speed up Cyprus's rebuilding process. Do you believe it may come to that?
No, I am personally against leaving the euro. First of all, because there is no alternative. I know.
Well, there is an alternative, obviously. You can restore the pound, you can devalue, you can help your own tourism industry, you can help your own real estate industry, you can actually perhaps persuade your own people and outside investors that there's a brighter future with a Cypriot pound.
Well, I don't share this view. I consider that by leaving the euro at the moment, our currency, as you said, will be devalued to such extent that a country that depends entirely on imports of raw material, imports of petrol, imports of medicines, imports of infrastructure for enterprises, then who is going to pay for all of this? This is going to be a terrible economic mistake, besides the political advantages of remaining within the European family and the Eurozone.
We have to end there. But Ioannis Kasoulides, thank you very much indeed for being on Hardtalk.
Thank you very much too.